It's official, the 2023 Rolex 24 will feature a 60 car grid with at least 10 cars on the wait list. I'll talk about who made it in and who's sitting on the sidelines crossing their fingers. After a reported 72 entries for the 2023 Rolex 24 at Daytona, Imsa finally releases the 60 car field that will take to the track. This comes after speculation on just how many grid spots would be available for the 24-hour race, just due to the increased interest in not only Imsa but in some of the classes, as well as the increased space that the new GTP cars will take on pit lane in order for them to be safely serviced. The list that was just released features 9 GTP entries, 10 LMP2 entries, 9 LMP3 entries, 8 GTD Pro entries, and a grid of 24 GTD cars. Amongst those cars that are entered, there's not very many that are entered just for the 24 hours of Daytona, as this is something that Imsa was said to be looking to avoid, especially with the over 70, at least north of 70 entries that had confirmed interest in the race. There were a fair number of entries on the 2022 Daytona grid that wound up being just Daytona only entries. KCMG entry comes into mind, that second Corvette entry that was on the grid, just to name a couple. So with the increased interest and the increased number of interested entries that were put forward, this is something that Imsa wanted to avoid for the 2023 running. Now, despite this, most of the classes stay just about the same size as they were in 2022. Of course, the DPI category, which is now gone, will be replaced by the GTP category. That increases 2 entries from 7 to 9. But the LMP2 and LMP3 classes both remain the same size as they were last year. It's when we get to the GT categories where things start to change it up a little bit. The GTD class actually grew 2 entries this year compared to where it was last year, to 24 entries in 2023. But it's the GTD Pro class which is where we see the cut. Last year there were 13 cars entered in the class, and this year we're down to just 8. Now, whether this can be chalked up to some drivers perhaps moving on to prototype projects, we don't have cars such as that second Corvette on the grid this year, or it could just be the simple case that that's all the interest that was there for the pro team entries. Regardless though, for me it was a bit of a surprise to see this dip in GTD Pro entries, and I want to know what you think. Are you surprised at the number of GTD Pro entries that are entered for this year's Rolex, or was it kind of expected for you? Let me know down in the comments below. Now, the result of this cleaning up of these Daytona only entries means that we're left with 56 entries for the Michelin Endurance Cup this year, which is up from about 41 that completed in all 4 of the Michelin Endurance Cup events last year. Fortunately, I wasn't able to find the official registration numbers of how many cars registered for the Michelin Endurance Cup, but just based on counting how many cars completed in all 4 events, it was 41 last year, so 56 is a considerable increase here as well. Now let's take a quick moment to look at the entries that are going to be on the grid for the Rolex 24 at Daytona. Starting things off with the GTP class, you see there are the 01 and the 02 Cadillac racing entries. Both of those will be Chip Ganassi Racings. It's also going to be the number 31 Wheel and Engineering Cadillac on the grid. You'll have the 2 Porsche Penske Motorsports entries, the number 10 Konica Minolta Acura ARX 06 to go along with the number 60 Meyer Shank Racing to round out the Acura entries. And then lastly, there are the 2 BMW M Team RLL entries, number 24 and number 25. In the LMP2 category, CrowdStrike Racing will be joined by Tower Motorsports, TDS Racing, Aero Motorsport, High Class Racing, TDS Racing with a second entry, Rick Ware Racing, moving from the GTD ranks up into LMP2. Of note, they will be racing an Orica, which they just recently purchased from High Class Racing, so they are not running the Ligier, as this entry list suggests. PR1 Matheson Motorsports, Proton Competition, and AF Corsa round out the LMP2 class. LMP3 will feature a couple of AWA entries. Let's go along with Sean Creech Motorsport, Andretti Autosport Performance Tech, MRS GT Racing, Riley Autosport, JDC Miller Motorsports, and Fast MD Racing. A fairly nice split of the Duquesne and the Ligier cars in LMP3. In the 8-car strong GTD Pro class, there's the Corvette Racing number 3, the defending champions Pfaff Motorsports, Vassar Sullivan with their GTD Pro entry, of course, the Heart of Racing Aston Martin Risi Competizione, Iron Lynx, TGM Sport, and WeatherTech Racing. And the largest class, the GTD class, there's Paul Miller Racing, Vassar Sullivan, Wright Motorsports, Iron Lynx, AF Corsa, Triarsi Competizione, Heart of Racing, Team Korthoff, NT Esport, Magnus Racing, Centaur Racing, MDK Motorsports, Windward Racing, Gradient, Inception, and Wright Motorsports, the US Racetronics Lamborghini, AO Racing, the Iron Dames Lamborghini, 2 entries from Kelly Moss, Racers Edge Motorsports with Wayne Taylor Racing, and to round it all up, the 2 Turner Motorsport BMWs. Of course, there's a few natural notes to talk about here, or things you might have noticed with the entry list here. Starting with some of the most obvious ones here, JDC Miller Motorsports competing in the LMP3 category for not only Daytona, but they have also confirmed that entry for Sebring. This is, of course, because their Porsche 963 GTP class cars are going to be delayed until at least after Sebring, so we're not going to see those cars on the grid. I believe it's not until at least Laguna Seca. And the other team that is supposed to be receiving one of those Porsche customer cars is Proton Competition. As you would have noticed, they have entered an LMP2 category car. There are plenty of the new GT3 cars as well that are going to be running in the GTD Pro and GTD classes, starting with the Ferrari 296 GT3 car. There will be 4 of them on the grid in January. There will also be 4 of the new Lamborghini Huracan GT3 Evo 2s, and a hefty group of Porsches, as there will be 7 of those new Type 992 Porsche 911 GT3Rs. And one of the things that you really love to see is the variation in the manufacturers that are going to be racing, specifically in the GTD classes. In fact, of the 8 entrants in the GTD Pro category, it will feature 7 different manufacturers. Another note about the GTD Pro class is you'll notice that Team TGM is going to be racing in that class and not in the regular GTD class. It's an interesting move on their part, as the car will be featuring 2 silver and 2 bronze rated drivers, but this is apparently intentional, and it is an attempt to utilize the different drive time regulations that are present for the GTD Pro class versus the GTD class. Looking at this from a bit of a larger picture, it is reported that there are 45 planned full season entries on the Imsa grid this year. Now, this is up from the 33 to 37-ish from last year. Again, unfortunately, I wasn't able to find the confirmed registrations from last year, but just going through and looking at, generally speaking, who ran basically the entire schedule, it was 33 to 37 entries. So a nice bump here as well, and that's really great to see that all of the rounds, not just Daytona, not just the Michelin Endurance Cup races, every single round from your Road Americas, your Lagunas, there's going to be more cars on track at VIR, even for those GT only rounds. So it should be a season of healthy grid sizes, no matter if we're watching the Rolex 24 or one of those 2-hour and 40-minute races. Now, the reserve list was not made public, but there are a number of big name teams that were left off of the list. These include Racing Team Turkey and the 2022 LMP2 class winners Dragon Speed for that LMP2 category. JR3 isn't on the list for in LMP3. In the GTD ranks, there's a few notable entries left off of the grid here for sure. Starting with KCMG, who you will recall last year, they were the other Porsche that was battling it out with Pfaff Motorsports for class victory there, eventually spinning out through the bus stop and actually finishing in 3rd place, I believe. A staple of the grid, the Hardpoint Porsche, it will not be on for the Rolex 24. The Carbon Racing Lamborghini, which was quite strong over the course of the season last year. The Sun Energy One Racing Mercedes. Of course, an iconic entry here with the flames across the front of that car. and ST Racing. Now, in case if there's any cars that drop off the grid or anything, Imsa will update. They'll release an update in early January. They're also going to provide an update with the entire roster of drivers for each of the cars. So that'll be coming in early January. But until then, there's still going to be plenty of Rolex and Imsa news to stay tuned into, such as the recent test at Daytona that saw all 4 GTP class cars take to the track together for the very first time. You can find out all about that right here. A big shout out to all of our early Patreon supporters. If you too want to support the show, then you can head over to patreon.com/offintheesses. But until the next one, I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.